Welcome to the Economic and Small Business Development Committee. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Chairman Horn.
Here, ma'am.
Senator Vanderwall.
Present.
Senator Lowers. Senator Schmidt.
Here.
Senator Lasada. Senator McDonald.
Here.
Senator Huizinga.
Here.
Senator McMorrow.
Here.
Senator Geis. Senator Moss.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have 7 members present. There is a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. With a motion from Vice Chairman Vanderwall to approve the minutes from April 21st without objection, it is so ordered, and with a motion from Vice Chairman McMorrow to excuse absent members without objection, it is so ordered. And before we get into our testimony, which is before I call up our guests, I do want to recognize one of our important staffers behind us, Mikhail Perkins. If you want to just raise your hand. Mikhail is about to tomorrow will graduate MSU Law School, and so just give him. So we just would like to celebrate when anytime one of our team does well. So congratulations to you. With that, just to kind of give you a flavor for what's going to happen today, we're going to be inviting up the Senate Majority Leader and in our guest today to talk about Senate Bill 888. And we have some cards of support. We are only taking testimony from our guest, Mr. Burnett, and from the Senate Majority Leader, but we will read in the other cards. We will be taking in testimony, personal testimony from other people. Anybody that wants to provide written testimony to the caucus or to the members is certainly able to do that at any time. So with that, I would like to invite up then Senate Majority Leader Mike Shirkey and Mr. Bob Burnett to come up with you. And Majority Leader, this is quite a pleasure to have you in our committee. It's unusual for you to actually be testifying on a bill, but I know how important this is to you. And we are missing the Minority Leader, Jim Ananick. He is unavailable for testimony.
Yeah,
today.
well, listen, thank you, Mr. Chair, and the committee members for allowing me to give testimony and welcoming Bob Burnett in and talk a little bit about some technology that I think Michigan really needs to evaluate carefully. I am happy to be staffing for the Senate Minority Leader today, and I can assure you that most of what I'm going to say, he's going to approve of, okay? And we wish him a quick recovery for whatever he's enduring right now. I can assure you that on the surface, this may seem like just a simple bill to approve and create a commission, but it's way, way more than that. In fact, in contemplating this bill, it actually brings up the fact that not only are our schools and our children experiencing gaps in education, but so are we. It's a financial literacy gap. And as we go through this testimony and we endure and embrace the questions that you're likely to ask, we're going to find out quickly that what money is and what monetary policy is not something that most of us spend a lot of time thinking about, but it actually permeates everything about our lives. The root of money in my world is really what represents what our work is. Work is force times distance. I won't bore you with any more engineering facts than that. Just to know that force requires energy. Therefore, money is energy. And energy permeates and affects every single part of our lives. We don't need any more evidence of that than if you happen to have filled up recently at the gas station and the effect that it has on everybody, and especially on those who are less fortunate than some of us are. Monetary policy affects energy in the broadest and most intricate ways. And we could have chosen to sign this bill, Senate Bill 888, to just about any committee. Because just about any committee, I can make the case, is affected in one way or another by energy. We chose economic development because we know that one of the goals of all of us, I believe, is to make Michigan attractive to human capital and financial capital. And I can't think of a topic today that is more pertinent than making sure Michigan is welcoming to the trends in the use and application of blockchain technology and everything associated with cryptocurrency. Bad monetary policy is a key factor, in my opinion, in the proliferation and the perpetuation of poverty across all peoples, Bad monetary policy really affects people. And I think we'll discover once we get into questions, that's precisely one of the problems that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, specifically Bitcoin, tries to address. What does good look like for your investment of time on this topic? I'll give you 4 things. Raise the importance of really understanding what money and monetary policy means to us and our state and our citizens. Number 2, inform the committee to work and to establish clarity and specificity as you process this request to create a commission. Again, this is not simply to create a commission. This is really sending a signal to the nation and the world that Michigan is paying attention. Number 3, begin to understand Bitcoin's uniqueness and its unrivaled role in the spectrum of cryptocurrencies. And last, but certainly not least, address what I moment ago addressed, and that is do what we can to make Michigan attractive to both human and financial capital. What does that mean? That means growth. So I'm exhorting you to learn, to lead on this very first important step. I took the liberties to provide just some high-end questions to help engage in the conversation. I hope that you balance the tendency for quick action with a thoughtful assessment of what might want to be edited or amended in this bill. And Senator Andick knows that very well. And then lastly, this is the foundation. This is a very important foundation for us to set up Michigan for growth and opportunity and prosperity across the entire spectrums of people. So with that, I'm going to shut up and turn it over to somebody who is expert. He's a good friend. He's a world-renowned expert in this area. I'm not going to go through his bio. You each have had a chance to look at that. And Mr. Chair, I'd say we open it up to questions.
Do you want to have an opening comment, Bob, before we get into this? Because I got a boatload of questions for you.
I'm sure you do. Senator Shirkey did a really good job, I think, of creating an overview. We have a saying, especially in the Bitcoin community, fix the money, fix the world. And I think a lot of times people that are looking at cryptocurrency or Bitcoin get caught up in a price. But there is a bigger agenda. There's a fundamental reason that it exists. And we can bore into that a little more if you guys would like. But Bitcoin was born, and it's the godfather of all cryptocurrencies, on the heels of the last financial crisis. And there were, at least by many people perceived to be many injustices that occurred in the way that the recovery, if there even was a recovery, occurred from that last financial crisis. I'll also point out one other thing, that sometimes it's hard to see the benefit or even the need sitting in a place like we sit today. It's important to at least try to change your lens a little bit and think about somebody who's living in Turkey right now with 70% inflation, somebody who lives in Sri Lanka or Lebanon, which have both had currency failures since the beginning of the year. Think about somebody in a second or third world country and what they go through, and make your judgments about it based on those criteria. Obviously, in addition to what you guys have to decide upon, which is what's best for Michigan and your citizens, and I respect that. But I say these things because the implications of what we're working on are massive. And I would say that the movement, if there is such a thing, because it's not a centralized, coordinated movement, is very grassroots, and it's starting in places like El Salvador and the Central African Republic right now. But I thank you for having me here today. I'm really honored, and I'm honestly very excited to see such a state the size of Michigan and a bipartisan group at least dipping their toe in the water and examining this. This puts you at the forefront, and at least my understanding of what your objectives would be are very noble and give you guys a great chance of leading not only the country but potentially even the world in what's happening.
Yeah, we thank you too, and I thank you for bringing one of the coins with you. I'm going to pass it around so everybody can see what it looks like. I was teasing Mike about that.
More questions now.
Let me ask you before, we do have the questions beginning to line up, Bob, but let me start a little bit because we're curious. My wife is curious because after Mike had tugged on my ear a little bit and put a few of us together in a room, I started buying small amounts of Bitcoin, like I would gold, perhaps, and through a company. And my wife's questioning where that comes from, and questioning my sanity. And so as we get into how this, Bitcoin is mined and discovered and all of those things, can you go back a ways for us and tell us what the genesis of Bitcoin is and what problems this idea was intended to address?
Yes. Yeah, it's a good opening question. First thing I want to say is there are two Bitcoins. There's a Bitcoin with a small b and a Bitcoin with a big B. Bitcoin with a small b refers to the token that trades for 25,000 or 50,000 or whatever. And the big B refers to the network and the ecosystem. So I'll do my best to clarify which of those two that I talk about. But my guess is today we're probably going to talk a lot more about the big B than we are about the little b. So Bitcoin really started, actually I'll back up even a little more. Blockchain, the concept of a blockchain was actually started in the 90s. So the very first kind of implementations of blockchain were in the 90s. There were lots of people in that time period trying to figure out how to do digital money, how might we do this. Most of them failed. Actually, all of them failed. I shouldn't say most, all failed. In 2008, on the heels of the last major financial crisis, someone or a group under the moniker of Satoshi Nakamoto created a white paper known as Bitcoin. And in that paper described a new monetary system. It had several key elements of it, but I would say the key elements are in the very first line of the paper. It talks about creating a version of electronic cash that allows peer-to-peer transactions without a trusted third party. What that means is that historically, anytime we write a check, we use a credit card, we wire money, let's say between myself and Senator Horn, we would need a third party to approve that transaction. The only way really around that was cash. And in this digital world that we live in, the availability of cash and potential usage of cash kind of is disappearing. So one motivation for Bitcoin was to solve that problem. The reason we've had to have a trusted third party is because of a problem known in banking as the double spend problem. If I write a check to Senator Horn for $500, and let's say I only had a limited amount of money in the bank, how does that transaction get validated? Who validates it? The bank. So in the Bitcoin white paper, a technical solution was discovered so that I could send the equivalent of $500 to Senator Horn without any third party, and he could know with 100% assurance that the money was there and valid. And it was immutable as well, meaning that there was no chance of it being reversed. In my opinion, that invention alone revolutionizes banking and the financial system. Additionally, the other problem has been the money supplies of the world. Fiat currency, which is a currency issued by a central government simply by decree, meaning there's no commodity that backs it, has been the norm since 1971. And we could certainly debate. I come from an Austrian economic school of thought. There are Keynesians who will admittedly disagree with me, but it's my opinion that has caused massive problems in the world, and things like Senator Shirky mentioning about wealth gaps, wealth inequalities. When you look at it from the perspective of the third world, the way the monetary system has stolen wealth from those places is really severe. So Bitcoin created an absolute money cap of 21 million and a very specific mechanism by which that money will get released. And so it's transparent. So unlike the Federal Reserve or other central banks around the world, in Bitcoin you always know how much money is in circulation. To the 100 millionth place, by the way, to the 100 millionth of a Bitcoin, any of you could get on a what's called a Bitcoin node, which is a very low-cost item, and audit the entire system and know exactly how much money is in the system. You'll know exactly the moment when any additional money gets added to the system, and you can examine the code and know programmatically exactly the rate at which it's expected to expand, also knowing that there will only ever be 21 million. So there are many aspects of Bitcoin, many really amazing technological innovations, but I'd say in summary, it was one to allow direct communication, peer-to-peer, person-to-person, and to restrict money supply expansion.
Thank you for that opening question. And then first one is from Senator McMorrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here. As we look at considering this commission within the state of Michigan, I think we would be remiss to not point out the crash that took place within the past few days. And also the rising trend of cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, used in phishing scams to target hospitals, schools, the elderly, those who are, particularly vulnerable. Sure. Because its original founding was to avoid government oversight and encourage anonymity. We saw the earliest proliferation of cryptocurrency in Silk Road. Is that going to be a focus of this commission as well, to ensure that as we move forward, and I certainly think we do, I think that governments have to be in a place understanding where we're moving, but how are we balancing consumer protection, environmental impact to ensure that we're not encouraging residents, companies to take on potentially risky investments and losing, the amount of money that we've seen, or amount of value we've seen lost in the past few days as we move forward?
Yeah, those are fair comments. It's certainly not my role to tell the commission what it should look at, but I would certainly recommend that those topics be covered as part of any pursuit. I will make a couple comments, though, on those, if that's okay. One is it pertains to price. So now we're talking about the little b for a moment. In the history of Bitcoin, if you look at any 200-week period, the price has always gone up. So Bitcoin is actually created as a savings technology, and I know this is going to sound a little bit contrary to what we're talking about, but right now, in its current maturity, it is an appropriate place to save money for the long term. It is highly volatile in the short term, but very stable in the long term. I know that sounds a little bit of an oxymoron. I would say, by the way, it is the antithesis of fiat currency, which is the opposite. Fiat currency is stable in the short term and very volatile and eroding in the long term. Senator Shirkey earlier talked about monetary systems. A monetary system, now I'm talking about the big B, the ideal monetary system is one which transfers energy, transfers money with the lowest amount of resistance over space and time. So if we talk about moving value over time, we have a current monetary system that discourages savings. And I think what you find is that for the less fortunate people of the world, the poorer, the lower income, savings is all they have. They don't have the ability to invest. So right now, the only way to beat inflation is through investment. In the long run, having a non-expanding monetary system encourages savings, not investment. So your point, Senator McMorrow, is fair, though, that I think there's an education piece, especially as you talk to new people. Like if you have $100 and your ability to put food on your table for the next week for your family is dependent on that $100, Bitcoin is not a good idea right now. If you have $100 that you want to give to your grandchild at birth to help them when they go to college, excellent idea, in my opinion. Your other comment, I believe, was related to like phishing scams and things like that. There's an interesting thing about Bitcoin in that it's what we call pseudo-anonymous. So I gave an example earlier of transferring some money to Senator Horn. So what's interesting is if I transmit that money to Senator Horn, until that moment, he didn't know what my Bitcoin wallet address was, and I didn't know his. He had to give it to me for him to pay him. But at that point, the anonymity breaks. And so now he and anybody that he wishes to tell can say, this is Mr. Burnett's address, and I can say it's his. So for instance, in the Silk Road incident, to this day, they are still tracking down people from the Silk Road. So it certainly is true that Bitcoin was a key piece of the Silk Road, as were other cryptocurrencies. But they've also been a key piece of actually tracking the people down, because the blockchain provides an immutable, permanent record of everything that happens. And so it's a pro and a con. There are several studies, including by the World Bank, about the use of cryptocurrencies and the percentage. And they are, every study I've ever read shows them to be smaller percentage of transactions used for criminal purposes or money laundering than fiat. So obviously cash is heavily used in a lot of criminal activities, right? So.
You know, that's exactly the reason I started buying the Bitcoin. Was I had the same idea in mind as when I did my education trust for my grandson. So I got the money set aside. I have no intent to do anything with it until they're ready for college, right?
Yeah.
So I have no idea what it's going to be worth. Hope it's going to be worth a lot. So next question is from Senator Vanderwall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank both of you for being here. I'm going to ask a question on the Big B first.
All right.
And what you have seen in where this commission potentially can bring the state of Michigan. We've seen several states that have embraced Bitcoin, and they've had an economic boom. If you looked at what they've done, how do you foresee Michigan's opportunity fitting inside that? Because if you look at the latest one is Texas, correct, which has done very well. Michigan is very uniquely positioned, I feel, right now, to come in to harvest some of this, if you want to call it, or mine this. How do you see that? And the second question is going to jump into Michigan's field right now of older oil fields that are in the need of investment with the opportunity to extract, and do you see Bitcoin moving inside that with an opportunity for Michigan to capitalize on that?
Yes, and I'll expand on that, of course. I was born and raised in Wisconsin, by the way, just across the lake in Kenosha. And one of the beauties of living up here is climate. So Michigan and states like Michigan have, in Bitcoin mining, a superior position because of climate. It's more moderate. So I am active in Texas. I have an employee down in Texas. My director of energy actually lives there. But they have a problem in that it gets really hot. And so the quote unquote, I guess I'll use the term data center today, the data centers that we put up are dependent on airflow, and we need cool air. And so given the choice of an oil field in the Permian Basin in Texas or an oil field in Michigan, all else being equal, I will pick Michigan, as I think all my competitors would. I'll say this as well, that some of you may have seen that the state of New York put some legislation, at least into committee, that would have banned Bitcoin mining. That ended up dying. It appears to be dead right now. But I will also say that there was a ripple effect of even just bringing that legislation in for discussion of essentially scaring us all away. That I would say it'll be several years before the state of New York will see us, because there are places like Texas and Wyoming and North Dakota and South Dakota, as well as other countries that are very welcoming. I think, Michigan, though, is in a position, especially of, I would say, the northern states, maybe the most advantageous position. Your energy resources and your climate, I think, are in a really advantageous position. I think the fact that this hearing is happening today is going to be very beneficial to you. Even just the fact that you guys are saying, hey, we're open to this discussion, is in complete contrast to New York. So specifically to the oil fields, one of the problems that with all energy is there's a lot of energy in the world. Just a lot of it happens to be stranded. So that can be an oil field that's an oil deposit or a natural gas deposit that's too far from a pipeline. It can be a geothermal field that's too far from a population center. I mean, there are a lot of examples like that. The beauty of Bitcoin is that we can move to the energy source. So unlike almost every other industry where you have to say, well, I have an energy production capability, but the manufacturing capability is somewhere else, I have to build the infrastructure to move the energy, which, by the way, also includes a lot of energy loss. 5% of all the electricity that's generated in the United States is lost in transmission. The Bitcoin industry has the ability to go literally right next door. I'm working on a project, for instance, in western Nebraska right now, my company, where our hope, our intent is to take over a natural gas field that is something on the order of 30 miles away from a pipeline. There will never be a possibility of using that gas in a commercial application. But we can take mining equipment there, we can extract the gas there, we can mine on site, and we can do it with essentially zero carbon emissions as well. So I also am aware, for instance, in the oil fields, here in Michigan, as everywhere, you have flaring occurring. Well, we can take that problem, because it's very rare that a flaring solution actually truly properly burns the carbon dioxide and the methane that are going up. But we can come in with the right equipment, we can turn that into energy that we consume on site and turn it into Bitcoin. So hopefully I covered the main topics.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Senator Moss.
Mr. Chair, and I know that a lot of the decisions, should this commission be created, be defined by the report out of this commission. And, I certainly heard and share some of the consumer protection concerns, but you will hear, obviously leading off of that last question, is the environmental impact. The more people that mine and the more that they use this heavy computer equipment to do so, the more electricity and energy is being consumed. As mining is increasing, what are the safeguards there? What are other states looking at to mitigate the environmental impact? What should we be looking at to mitigate the environmental impact as mining is increasing exponentially?
Yeah, that's a common concern, and so I appreciate that. First of all, I want to point out that what we do is really no different than what Google or Microsoft or any of the large data centers do. We run computers and we use energy. So we aren't directly, the process that we're using isn't directly contributing. It's the fact that we're using electricity generation that may increase the carbon footprint. The Bitcoin industry, though, as a whole, is extremely sensitive to this issue. The Bitcoin Mining Council, which is a large organization of kind of all the major Bitcoin companies in the world consolidating the information, so that we're currently using 60% sustainable and renewable energy in the operations, compared to the normal standard, which is about 21%. The Bitcoin network runs a little differently than most. Sometimes I'll read articles about a Bitcoin transaction consuming a certain amount of energy or causing a certain carbon footprint. It doesn't really operate that way. There's not a cost or energy consumption per transaction. The energy consumption is constantly securing the entire network. So in the most simplest terms, that's what I can say. Much like we have a existing financial system, which includes all the servers, all the branch bank locations, and technically even a police and defense system that protects our money. So creating a comparison point for how much money Bitcoin consumes and what its impact point is somewhat difficult. But I will go back to one other thing, which is Bitcoin incents the development and use of these stranded energy sources. And so I'll give you an example from my own company about things that I think that happen that are very environmentally favorable. So my company, a little over a year and a half ago, took a hydroelectric facility that was in disrepair in South Carolina. We put about $3 million into the refurbishment of it. It had not run for 3 years. And we now are mining on the riverbanks with zero carbon footprint directly there with, by the way, no impact on the grid. We could potentially, and we've talked to the Duke Power there, Duke Energy there. If they wanted to, we could connect back to the grid and also provide some safety mechanism for them so that if they had emergency needs where they needed extra power, we could connect that back into the grid. You're seeing across Texas, especially in ERCOT, the mining companies are coming in guaranteeing base load to the utility companies and also ensuring that that base load can, on demand, be switched over to support the grid if in emergency situations. One of the benefits of our industry is that we can literally do that in a minute. So unlike trying to take down, let's say, a manufacturing facility or a smelting facility or something of that order, which may take hours to respond, we can respond in a matter of a minute and just shut the whole thing down. So I hope I covered some of your topics.
Yeah, and again, we're engaging in this discussion. It's something we need to figure out where this space is. But I think one of the pitches of Bitcoin and crypto is that it is quick, it is accessible, and it doesn't require the hurdles that are in brick and mortar, the encumbering, human errors that could prevent transactions from happening. But there are still brick and mortar implications for people utilizing it. And I think that we really need to examine that as we're figuring out where this space is in Michigan.
Yeah, fair enough.
We've yet to hear from the chairman of the Energy Committee, who's with us today. But let me give you some ideas too, Senator. It's not just going to be up to the commission, but also up to members and in industry leaders to think about how we can manage this. When I start making connections between MSU's investment into farming research, dairy research, and they intend to use biodigesters to create electricity. Now, they want to set up charging stations on 2,500 farms in Michigan, and who the devil's going to charge up their car in the farm? But who's going to sit there for 20, 40 minutes and charge up the cars, have them bale hay for a while, I guess, while they're waiting. But instead of, what if we partnered with them, right? And we set up a facility, a small facility on that farm. You have a closed loop system that creates zero carbon, right? You use the manure to create the methane that creates the energy. The solids go back into fertilizer. The energy it creates the product. We've got hydro facilities that are having trouble getting proper funding from power purchase agreements from our utilities. What if they broke off and worked on this? What if we had our grow facilities, Mr. Leader, who need heat to grow their crops indoors, right? And we need to push heat out of one facility into another, but they need to create energy as well. And so these are all ideas that are innovative and creative that young, you and I are only going to be here for a few more months. All these young people are going to have to take over for us, aren't they? The next question comes from Senator Huizenga, speaking of young, new members.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Majority Leader, for being here today, and for Mr. Burnett. I appreciate the idea of exploring this, the concept. I think many of us are ignorant. It's new, emerging, and for us to learn more is probably very important. You talked a little bit about the impact on monetary policy, and considering the volatility, and this is maybe I'm not sure, a big B or a little B question, but the volatility we see out of not just Bitcoin itself, but the other products that are even supposedly tied to U.S. dollars. And this is probably bigger scope, but how do you see this tying to one of the few tools that we have in this country for monitoring and mitigating inflation? If it's tied to something that's volatile, when monetary policy may be tied to something with volatility, I'm just concerned, and it's probably bigger than what this commission wants to, but it's germane to the discussion, I think.
Yeah, it's a very complex question, so I'll do my best to give a high level explanation. I believe that, please don't take this as flippant. In the Bitcoin world, we say 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. And so for those of us believe that is the monetary system of the future, there was no change. There was no crash yesterday. Now, I'm exaggerating. I understand that's the case. That's not really the case in today's world.
There's a sale.
Yeah, but yeah, it's on sale is the way we look at it. In fact, what I like to tell people is that when I acquire Bitcoin, I don't say I bought Bitcoin. I say I sold dollars, and so it's just a different philosophical way of looking at the same transaction. That said, it's going to take a while for the world to adjust and understand. We have 2 countries that have already made it legal tender. We have people that are investing in it and still looking at it in, I would say, traditional ways, like they would look at a stock or some other commodity. And so when we value Bitcoin, when we say it's at $28,000 today, whatever the current price is, what we're really saying is that's the price at which the last transaction occurred, right? I believe it's improper to say that all 21 million Bitcoin are worth $28,000 each, because we know, for instance, for a fact that over 2/3 of the Bitcoin has not moved in a year. Now, in that time period, Bitcoin's been as high as $69,000 measured in US dollars. And 2/3 of the people said, I wouldn't sell, right? They had an opportunity to sell. They did not. We also know, because of the unique aspects of the blockchain, that the money that's the Bitcoin that's being sold right now is moving from relatively new wallets, meaning people that bought it recently, and it's being acquired by people that have held a lot of Bitcoin for a long time. So it's a really unique thing about Bitcoin is that we have a public ledger. So literally every transaction and every account is public, and anybody that wishes to see it can do so. So it's very different from, we all have our checking accounts and savings accounts, and as money moves in and out, nobody knows, right? Nobody knows what any of us has, and nobody knows what transactions. Bitcoin kind of flips that on its ear and says, no, it's all public. And it allows us to see these sorts of things. So it's my opinion that even the talk of, hey, the price crashed is a bit of a misnomer, because I don't think it represents the true value that the majority of the people that hold Bitcoin are viewing it with. That said, one of the issues with Bitcoin, much like I would say honestly with the stock market, is we allow people to buy it with leverage and margin, and what's happened over the last couple days is really the result of that. So the catastrophe primarily over the last week or so is because of people using leverage and getting margin called, and then it kind of cascades too. As the margin call occurs, they usually use Bitcoin to secure the margin, by the way. So it forces the sale of Bitcoin, and so it kind of will cascade down. You can see the same things have happened with individual stocks in the past, where you'll see this fairly big volatility in a short window occurs because of the same thing. So again, it kind of goes back to what we said before. In the history of Bitcoin, look at any 200-week window, and the price is always higher. So to me, it's all optics and perspective. And again, as I think it was Senator McMorrow who asked the question before, I would say, people should not be using money that they can't afford to wait on. Right? I don't want to say can't afford to lose, but can't afford to wait on. That I think Bitcoin provides a very high probability of gaining purchasing power over time. That whatever amount of money or energy you put into Bitcoin, if you save it in Bitcoin, it will gain purchasing power with time. But you have to have what we call low time preference, meaning you're not looking for a quick buck. But that's probably true of almost any investment, right? I think people that invest in things and are hoping for the quick return usually have a pretty poor result.
Next question is from Senator Lowers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Difficult to pare these questions down to certain things, but I'd like to go in a kind of different direction here, because I'm considering a couple different things. So two parts to this question. One is, as the chair of energy, is it totally inconsistent to be considering Bitcoin as a long-term investment, hedge against inflation, if you will, and installing a hand-powered water well at my home at the same time? The difference being that it appears dependent on energy, and I would install a hand-powered water pump at home because I would be concerned as the chair of energy that I might not have power someday.
I think there's some analogy there. The relationship of Bitcoin to energy is obviously a very interesting one. I was in Texas about 3 weeks ago, and I had an opportunity to work with Senator Cruz on some similar things that he's working on at the federal level. And I said, one of the comments I made, hopefully that had substance to him, was that I believe what Bitcoin provides is a justification for the expansion of energy. If certainly in the position that you hold, any expansion of the grid requires a consumer for that grid. You know, it's major capital investments, and so Bitcoin provides that. It is a 24/7, 365. The Bitcoin mining network provides a 24/7, 365 consumption of a known amount of energy. So it's highly appealing to somebody in the energy business. I'd also say, and forgive me for going off a little tangent, I also say that it's very important, in my opinion, to respect the right of somebody to use an outlet as they see fit. That if you look back to what New York was trying to do with their legislation, essentially what they were trying to say was, we're going to try to regulate what you can plug in the wall and what kind of software you can run on your computer. And I personally, I find that offensive and way beyond the proper bounds of any regulation or government. You know, that kind of gets into, you know, is it okay to have Christmas lights but not a nightlight? Is it okay to use a hairdryer but not a microwave? I mean, I think we're starting to get into that kind of territory there. So forgive me because I went on a tangent there.
Mr. Chairman, I want to ask it. So looking at some of the broader applications of blockchain, there's been a discussion since I've been in the legislature about notices and records. And I've been on the side of the issue that doesn't have complete trust in those that we sometimes task with the responsibility of providing the record. And that's why notices become so important, because it's that third party, if you will.
Yeah.
Does blockchain technology offer potential solution to those types of questions as well?
Yeah, I would say a properly constructed blockchain. Not all blockchains are created equal. Word can be used, just like all databases aren't the same. What a blockchain done, if it's supported by a decentralized mining network, can do, and a set of nodes, is it can create the most secure records, it can create immutable records, and it can create transparent records. So I would think, not being an expert on government records, but it would seem like those are really important things that you can say, I know exactly what happened. So we'll go, you know, a blockchain is really a recording of transactions. And more importantly, it is an exact and immutable chronological order of transactions. So there are a lot of things, obviously, in this world that, you know, if you're looking at the title to a car or the deed to a home or a piece of land, where I would think that technology would be highly, highly attractive, that you could do that. And also that it's completely transparent and accessible to anybody. I think it could apply to voting as well, by the way, I think.
So, Mr. Chair, I guess I would put that out there as one of those things that we would consider, if we had a commission, as the feasibility, I don't know what it would cost, of using it for those types of things. I mean, talk about a beautiful public record.
Thank you, and it would be great if the chairman of Energy would duly note how much leeway and freedom I give him when he's asking questions. For the next time. He's very patient with me. Next question comes from Senator McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a very quick question. You've been alluding to it this whole testimony, but which cities, states, and countries do this the best? And what opportunities and challenges are they discovering from embracing this?
Yeah, great question. I would say right now, the country that's doing it the best is the United States. We're very fortunate. I'll give you just a little historical context. Until June of last year, between 50 and 60% of all the Bitcoin mining was done in China. And the government of China banned Bitcoin mining. And it caused essentially a massive flood of that technology and capital here to the United States. That exodus is still going on, by the way. It's not over. Texas and Wyoming have, I would say, been the pinnacle states in terms of opening their doors. And both have energy resources that are relatively plentiful. So I would say those two have been the best here in the United States. Other countries, we're seeing a lot in the Central America area right now. Places like Paraguay and Honduras are aggressively pursuing this. Specific to mining, some of the Scandinavian countries like Norway have some hydroelectric resources that, basically they can't use it all. Canada, just to your north, it's my understanding, I believe that some of your energy is purchased, on your grid from Ontario. Ontario and Quebec and places like that have massive overbuilds, frankly, and there's a lot of energy there. What's interesting about Canada, though, is I will say that the Bitcoin community is getting a little concerned about the jurisdictional risk in Canada. And I think the momentum, while the energy is there and the costs are there, the jurisdictional risk seems to be increasing. So I think not just Bitcoin mining, but any business. I mean, you want to go where you're welcome, right? You want to go where you have the support of groups like you and also the support of the community. And so in Canada, it's becoming a little wonky there. I will say, because there's more than just Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin, that clearly El Salvador is at the pinnacle. I was actually there through Sunday with my wife, working on some business things and working with the government there. They are extremely friendly and extremely aggressive about trying to pursue business. Other places like Singapore, Portugal, have been some smaller places like Isle of Man and Malta. They're aggressively pursuing people, software developers, especially to come into their country and code there and live there. Many of them are offering citizenship packages so that with a very small investment, usually paid in Bitcoin, by the way, you can acquire a passport. The concept of the mobile worker, as we kind of all learned through COVID, has changed a lot, and so I think a lot of people are becoming more open to that. And I'm here as a 57-year-old guy, but frankly, I'm pretty atypical in the Bitcoin community. The Bitcoin community is a lot of 20, 30, and early 40 aged people, and they're highly mobile, and they're highly motivated, and they're not afraid to go live in Malta or Portugal or a place like that, and they're doing so.
Next question is from Senator Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had a lot of good questions, a lot of thoughts. What are the downsides if we're not more involved as a state or don't get active?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to answer that at a couple levels. So the first level is that I think if you choose to do nothing, you still have made a choice, and that by doing nothing, you're just going to get ignored. Put it bluntly, you'll get ignored. I think if you wait a lot is going to happen over the next, I would say, 24 months. A lot of roots are going to get established in the mining industry, in the software development industry, and those roots are going to get laid. So I think you guys have a lot going for you here. Energy resources, you have great universities, you have the perfect climate, you have a lot of those things going for you. So I think if you hang your banner out now, I think you will attract a lot. If you don't, then I don't believe it may be that you can never catch up. That just like Silicon Valley grew up around, out of in Northern California. Right now, Miami and Austin, for instance, are very big hotbeds of development in the cryptocurrency industry. But I don't think the roots are so strong that there isn't room for that to change or for somebody else to emerge. I'll also say, though, that if you don't make a clear statement in the way that you're going to tax and you're going to regulate, there's going to be a basic assumption that you're not interested or that you're behind, right? And there are a lot of choices. There are a lot of other places, as we've talked about, like Texas and Wyoming and Florida, that are aggressively already pursuing it. If you guys go now, you'll be in the top, let's say, half a dozen states to pursue it. And you have a lot of resources. I think, Michigan can compete with a Texas or a Florida. It can frankly overwhelm Wyoming or North Dakota or South Dakota. If you guys throw yourself at it, you can win. You can do that. But if you wait too long, like I said, those roots are going to be established, and I don't know how they come back. I'll also say that this is a little different than maybe other things, because you could say, well, okay, we missed this one, let's get the next one. It would be my opinion that this is the biggest financial revolution in 5,000 years that's about to occur. So if you miss it, I really couldn't say what all the ramifications would be, but I would say there would be a flight of capital and a flight of labor if you miss it.
Thank you. I'm not going to be around 5,000 years from now. So, maybe try to get something done now, Mr. Leader. The next question is from Senator Vanderwall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you for the opportunity to ask a couple more questions. I kind of want to jump into the little B real quick.
Okay.
And as we see consumers that are taking this opportunity to purchase it, and actually a little bit out of my norm, but they want to start using it as their cash, correct? How do you foresee businesses inside the state of Michigan taking advantage of this opportunity to start accepting Bitcoin as their form of payment for a service that they do or a product that they develop, and how can they better position themselves to make that a win for them?
Yeah, well, I think there's an awareness, first of all, and I'll give you an example of how powerful it can be. So as I mentioned, Bitcoin never is off. It functions 24/7, 365. So we're all familiar with banker's hours, right? So if I want to accept a wire or send a wire, especially internationally, and it happens to be Tuesday evening, I can't initiate that transaction until the following morning. And if there happens to be a holiday, then I got to wait another day. I did a transaction with it. We had a customer in Turkmenistan who called us about a year ago, and I think this is a great example. We were going to sell him $350,000 worth of mining equipment. He wanted it as soon as possible. So we told him what we normally do, which is here's our bank wire information. And the typical process is going to be he was going to have to take his local currency, convert it to dollars, go to his bank, his international bank, get it wired to my bank. We're going to have to wait 3 to 5 business days for that to clear. There were probably going to be on the order of $300 to $400 of fees associated with that transaction. And of course, I wasn't going to send $350,000 worth of equipment to Turkmenistan until I had the money. So we told him we accept Bitcoin. It happened to be Tuesday evening at 8 o'clock. 30 minutes later, I had the money. I had 100% assurance that I had the money. And the next morning, the money went to Turkmenistan, the equipment went to Turkmenistan, and I paid about $8 in fees from the Bitcoin network to process that. So I think the starting point for Michigan businesses are things like that. It connects you to the world. It gives you a 24/7, 365 banking access. There is something called the Lightning Network, which is probably going to be a little difficult for me to explain succinctly here, but it is a network that sits on top of Bitcoin that allows very fast, very low fee, small transactions to occur. About 1/6 of all of the credit card terminals in the U.S., all that use the NCR system, are now capable of using that network. It's up to the merchant to decide if they want to turn it on and accept it. But that capability is already built into, roughly that percentage of the entire nation. So in summary, though, I would say the starting point, though, is I think it can revolutionize as a starting point and maybe as a way of kind of easing in and getting comfortable. If we educate Michigan businesses about how to move money 24/7, 365 with complete security. There's one thing I didn't mention about Bitcoin is it provides what's called transaction finality in about 30 minutes. So if I had given an example before of giving, let's say, a check to Senator Horn. It may be that the next day, Senator Horn's bank tells him that he has $500, but transaction of finality actually occurs weeks or months after that point, because there are several conditions under which, for instance, if I had a large IRS bill and I was bankrupt, and the IRS might knock on Senator Horn's door and say, hey, I'm sorry, that check you received from Mr. Burnett is no good, and we're going to take $500 away from you. That concept of transaction finality is another major attribute of Bitcoin, and it allows things like these international transactions to occur with certainty.
Thank you, and I appreciate it. I hate to do this, but I have to run to my next committee. But I want to say I'm fascinated with your knowledge, and I could probably ask you a million more questions, but I really do appreciate your time today and coming in and speaking to this committee. I look forward for us to continuing this process and moving Michigan forward. And again, thank you for sharing, and appreciate it very much.
Thank you,
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have no more people listed for questions, Mr. Lader.
May I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bob, why don't you speak a little bit to what you know and what you observed on jurisdictions, governments contemplating or actually putting Bitcoin on their balance sheets?
That's a great question. So I've worked with El Salvador, as I mentioned. They made an announcement of June of last year. Did you ask country or company?
Country.
Country. Okay, I just want to be sure I got it right. So country. So
State. Or state.
Or state. Okay. Well, we'll talk about El Salvador for a second here. So. Might ask why would a country like El Salvador declare Bitcoin as legal tender? Why would they put it on their balance sheet, which they've done to a fairly large degree? In fact, they bought more Bitcoin overnight and that they just announced. Well, the reason is this. In the case of El Salvador, they had something on the order of $100 billion in their treasury. They looked at what was happening, and they use dollars, by the way. They do not have their own fiat currency. They were a dollar-based economy. And they looked at that pile of money and said, it's a melting ice cube, that the only certainty is that every day that we hold it, it's worth less. They foresaw, as I would say I foresaw, as many other people involved in economics saw, inflation was coming. And they said, if I hold all this money and it's going to lose 7, 8, 10% annually, say on $100 billion, lose 7% in purchasing power year over year, and that's pretty bad. So they made the decision to start converting some of their sovereign treasury into Bitcoin because they did not have confidence in retaining long-term value with the dollar. We have seen, by the way, several companies, Tesla, for instance, a company called MicroStrategy, which probably at current value holds about $4 billion on their balance sheet for exactly the same reason. That, in reality, it's no different than the example we talked about before, that if you want to hold money for the long term, right now, especially, there really aren't any products that allow you to fight inflation properly. If you hold it in cash, you're not going to work out well. There are no treasury products or some of the traditional things that I think people in those positions would use to try to fight inflation and at least retain value. So we've seen El Salvador do it. We've now seen the Central African Republic do it, a second country. We've had other places around the world, cities and states and regions, declare it as legal tender and start to put it on the balance sheet. But it really comes back to that melting iceberg example.
Thank you. And kind of getting back to the nature of the bill, this will be the setting up of commission as testimony only today. Mr. Lader, you're co-sponsor of this bill, as many of us are. What are your expectations really for that, for what do you hope to see this commission look at? And because, Bob, you brought up, taxation issues and other regulatory issues. What do you hope to see from this commission?
So I look for this committee to evaluate the guideline provided in the definition of a commission and establish one, and then we will go out and recruit people to serve on the commission to provide those kind of guidelines to going forward. I can promise you that I have a long list of suggested amendments to the bill as it's submitted. Senator Annick, the primary sponsor, is already aware of them. Again, to accelerate the process, And we didn't get into talking about, Bob talked a lot about mining, and the inference was it was privatized. But there's no reason why Michigan can't be mining on its own state-owned land where it has vacated gas wells, for instance. And that would be an amazing contribution to the future of the state. I can envision, frankly, long-term, with a little bit of creativity, really changing the way Michigan is in terms of tax structure and competitiveness, both from a personal standpoint and a commercial or business standpoint. So the playing field is broader than most of us can actually put our arms around. But if we wait too long to start, put our toe in the water, then we'll be reacting.
I have two thoughts, maybe questions that as long as we have you here, Bob, too, and Senator Shirkey. And by the way, for the audience members, if you have a 1 o'clock lunch date, you're 8 minutes late. But if we're just out of respect for your time, feel free, to mosey on. But I just find this so interesting. What I'd like to see out of this commission too, as we're moving forward, issues that that are facing Michigan, right? We try to solve problems when they exist. We have one issue that we deal with. We have firefighters and police officers that are retiring from our cities early because they no longer have pensions, right? They have 401ks. So they leave early, they move on to other communities, they're very mobile. the pensions used to keep them, based in their home cities. And with the Bitcoin being more of a long-term investment, do you see any kind of a return of a pension type investment that can be used to incentivize public employees to stick around their jobs longer? It doesn't have to be answered today, but that's one of the issues I'd like the commission to take a look at. There's a real serious problem, turnover, right, and attrition.
One thing you can, if I may,
Certainly.
one thing you can count on from me is a recommendation for the committee to look at separating the commissions into two. I think the opportunities and the types of problems to be solved with the application of blockchain technology is separate and uniquely different than making sure that Michigan is open to the embracing of the Bitcoin, of cryptocurrency. And if we cause them to both be processed together, I think it's going to slow things. I think it'll slow things down.
And it's simple things like can I pay my car tabs?
Yeah.
With it. But the last thing I'll have you leave the committee with as we consider this, and because you kind of talked about a little bit the kind of the pitfalls of doing nothing, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like all economic development. If we do nothing, we see nothing happening, and we see exodus from the state to other states that are doing something. What is this network really like? I mean, you described younger people, mobile. If we are welcoming and we are looking at different things, whether we're looking at the mining, we're opening up our eyes to investing as the state of Michigan, to accepting payments as the state of Michigan, opening up to regulating, to taxing properly, whatever that happens to mean. How fast does that network work? And when do we start seeing movement into Michigan?
There are different aspects of it. One of the beauties of, I'll start with mining, is that it can respond very quickly. So as an example, if I were able to identify a source of a reasonable amount of power at an appropriate price today, I could probably be here in 4 to 5 months with a reasonable size operation. So it's a very fast period. If it was also required the development of an energy source, like maybe we had to drill wells and we had to put generators in, and maybe adds a little bit. But I guess the bottom line is it's unlike maybe some other industries where we can do things very, very quickly, especially in the small to medium sized sites. I think you'll also find that things like the software development community, these are young people, often unmarried or without kids. They're highly mobile. There's this concept of the digital nomad, which is very common in that world where people don't even have a home, frankly. They're kind of just wandering around. They go where the opportunity sits, and I think you would attract a lot of those people very quickly if you had the right incentive and right opportunity for them. Probably have a great chance of having them stay, though, which I know is what you would want, right? You don't want transitory people, but you want people to stay. But if you give them a business environment where they come, they will absolutely do that. I think if you couple that with some of the things like Senator Shirkey said, like if the state were to enter the mining business itself, which I believe, by the way, over the course of the next several years, you'll see most states, most sovereign nations mining Bitcoin themselves. Bitcoin mining is not only the process by which transactions get validated, but it's also the process by which new money gets issued. So our payment in Bitcoin is really the creation of new money. So we're on our way toward that 21 million. There's 19.1 million in circulation now. It's through the miners that the last 1.9 million come in. And I think that the least expensive way and most certain way to acquire it is to mine it. And I would think if you examined the energy infrastructure of the state, there are probably lots of places where energy is being underutilized or not utilized at all, and that would be a great place to sweep in and do that. So hopefully that answered your
Kenny,
question.
if I may again, I'm going to go circle completely back to the beginning, and I talked about gap, education gap, and financial literacy gap. And so the full adoption and the full benefit of moving to a monetary policy that protects people's downside so they can actually save money long term and not have to worry about inflation is directly related to the adoption scale and how quickly people embrace. And so, for an example, there are services right now where we could offer to the employees of the state of Michigan, just like they have the option today to take so much of their money out of their paycheck and put it into a 401k. There's services available today, perfectly legitimate, perfectly legal, that it could take a even smaller percentage potentially and put it into Bitcoin. And that spreading out the ability for people to see how it works and what the possibilities are and making sure that there are no obstacles in our rules prohibiting that. I have had a conversation with Treasurer Eubanks on this, and she's, her eyes were like yours just now, lit up and said, maybe we should look at that. But those are the kind of signals that say, wait a minute, Michigan is doing something different. We should pay attention there.
Terrific. Thank you both. Thank you for traveling to Michigan.
My pleasure.
Telling a
Thank
story.
you.
I have 3 cards. I've got in support Steve Japinga with Lansing Chamber of Commerce, David Silva Smith from DeWitt, Brent Forsberg with TA Forsberg Incorporated, all in support of Senate Bill 888. And again, this is testimony only. This won't be the last time we talk about this. So you may see a lot of questions coming to you by email or by telephone, and so we appreciate again your testimony.
Please, yes.
With that, and seeing no further business in front of the committee, this committee is adjourned.